Welcome back. So this section is all about writing good Midjourney prompts. We've learned the different parameters, some of the ways we can control the actual image generation, but now we're going to talk about how we write a good prompt and what goes into a good prompt. It's a little bit different than prompting GPT. Other than the obvious difference that we're generating images and not text, you'll find that Midjourney is far, I hesitate to say dumber, but it doesn't understand the English language anywhere near as well as ChatGPT. But you can still get incredible results if you know what to do. By the way, I forgot to mention, all the assets in the slides you see here, like this little robot typing at a computer, all generated via Midjourney. Okay, let's get started. So in this section, we'll talk about writing good prompts, and then we are going to revisit some more advanced prompting tactics and techniques and some other parameters that we can use later on, like image prompts, weighting different parts of a prompt. There's more to Midjourney, but I figured we should start with understanding how to write a good prompt. The first rule that you should always keep in mind is that generally, the longer and more descriptive the prompt, the better. It's not a hard rule. You can get away with super short prompts, but anytime you do something, even if it's just a single word, it will still work, but the output image or images will rely heavily on Midjourney's default styles. Midjourney will pick up the slack and decide what something is supposed to look at. If you don't specify the camera angle, the composition, the mood, the color, the whatever, all the different things that we can talk about in this section. So it's generally better to be descriptive. Now let me just demonstrate this. I'm going to do two imagines. I'll zoom in. Imagine, and let's do something super simple like cuttlefish. This is one of my favorite animals. I'll just do a single word, and I'll be back when that finishes. Okay, it's not quite finished, but it's almost there. You can see some of the detail already. It seems to be relatively realistic looking examples of cuttlefish. And that's great. It's basically the default Midjourney styles being applied. But if I get more specific and more detailed, I could completely change this, even with just a few words. Maybe I'll say cartoon, purple cuttlefish, and let's go with happy. Just 4 words this time, but we'll get a very different result. And this is probably very obvious. I assume, this is not really teaching anything all that remarkable, but I do want to demonstrate that you can get away with just a single word. You can actually even just do an emoji. So while that's going, let's do an imagine prompt with an emoji. How about fire emoji? And okay, you can see we're getting a very different result already. We're only about, a third of the way there. But we're getting purple, happy, cartoon, cuttlefish. And those are just some of the dimensions, the different things we can control. We didn't even talk about in that prompt the angle, the composition, the lighting. It's just color, mood, subject, and style, cartoon. And there we go. It's almost there, and we get a very, very different output. And I think it finished up. There we go. Beautiful, purple, happy, cartoon, cuttlefish. Very different output. And you can see the emoji one is working away. We're getting quite diverse results that all have to do with fire in some way, or fire-ish. Not very specific at all, just a single emoji, but it does work. But generally, when I'm working with Midjourney, I have something in mind. Unless I'm really just exploring and I'm not sure what I want, I usually have an image in my head almost. It can be nice to be surprised by Midjourney, but it's also nice to have it do what you want. And that's where being descriptive comes in. It sounds obvious. It is obvious. The more descriptive, generally, the better. With the caveat of what I'll show you in the next video. Let's finish up the fire. There we go. That's pretty neat, actually. I like this one up top here. This little fire terrarium looking thing. I don't know why it won't load for me. There we go. Yeah, that's neat. Okay, next we'll talk more about prompting. The next thing you have to know about Midjourney is that it kind of sucks at understanding the English language, the relationship between words, and basic grammar. It isn't completely useless in that regard, but compared to something like ChatGPT, where you can provide really long, complex sentences or full paragraphs, even an essay, and it's able to respond well, Midjourney is not at all at that same level. It often struggles to understand the English language like a person would, or even like ChatGPT would. So don't count on it to understand the sentence structure or even the basic relationship between words. And we've actually kind of already seen this when we talked about things like if you write a prompt that says birthday party without cake, or with no cake, or don't include cake, it will often just include cake. It doesn't understand the relationship between don't, include, and cake. And that's another topic we'll revisit when we talk about negative prompting in just a moment. So you don't have to ignore grammar entirely. I wrote ignore grammar. It's more don't rely on it understanding English and grammar and the relationship between words, and don't be surprised if it just doesn't understand what you're asking for. And understand is not really the right term, of course, right? It's just a model here. But if it gives you results that you're not expecting based on your input, sometimes you need to simplify the language. And you'll often see prompts on the showcase on midjourney.com or on Reddit that look something like this. A long series of concepts and descriptors, right? Incredibly powerful anime woman. For whatever reason, people love generating, well, I shouldn't say whatever reason. I think we know the reason. Certain people love generating images of anime women. If you go in the showcase and you sort by top or rising, they tend to be all anime women portraits. But that aside, this is not really a sentence, right? It's just a bunch of descriptors created by these people, certain artists, I guess. Movie poster style, box office hit, masterpiece of storytelling, main character center focus, monsters and mech creatures locked in combat, nuclear explosions. Here's another example. Dramatic photo of a blue viper coiled and ready to strike. Flash, fast shutter, detailed eyes, intricate scales. By Annie Leibovitz. Photorealism, bokeh blur, vivid color. This is not really a sentence. This works well. And here's one more example. Photography by Mark Davis in the style of double exposure, Swiss realism, shiny eyes, monochrome landscapes, strong facial expression, mysterious jungle, photographic montage. I didn't write these prompts. These are just taken from existing showcase images that I thought were cool looking. And they work. They gave us, I can show them in a moment. Or I'll show what happens when I run them at least. We get decent results. But it's not a sentence, really. It doesn't follow traditional English grammar. Another thing that you might have noticed is that there's a lot of commas in those prompts. That's a choice that people make. It's not something that Midjourney necessarily recommends. The docs don't talk about it. The commas don't actually mean anything to the Midjourney bot, at least according to Midjourney and their documentation. There's no official recognized meaning, but they're used to separate out individual concepts and pieces of a prompt, generally to make it easier for us humans to look at the prompt. Instead of just having all of these separated by spaces, which still works, by the way, it's just easier to understand the different components of the prompt when you use commas. Some people use periods or dashes, but commas seem to be the most common by far. Another thing you'll see that we'll cover later on is the double colon, and that has a different meaning. It actually means something. Anyway, let me demonstrate some of these. And the first thing that I'll do is show you an example. When I say that it doesn't really understand the English language very well, here's a very simple prompt. I asked orange tabby cat sitting inside a cardboard box that is perched on a bookshelf. So I want it to be a cat in a box on a bookshelf. Instead, it's just getting cat perched on a bookshelf, basically. I don't see a box, really. There's no cardboard box here. It's just a cat on a bookshelf. When I instead just broke it up into a couple different concepts, and I used commas in this case, but I also just slimmed down the English language. I used fewer prepositions. It's orange tabby cat sitting in cardboard box, comma, on bookshelf. Simpler language. I didn't say perched on a bookshelf. It gave me slightly better results where I'm getting a cat in the box and also a bookshelf. It doesn't happen to be on the bookshelf, but the bookshelf is in the background. Here's a few more examples of the way that a lot of people write prompts. The syntax I already showed you that is basically just a bunch of different concepts and terms separated by commas. So this says, by Akira Toriyama, Arthur Rock, I don't know these artists, fantasy, cute, anthropomorphic frog, knight, kids manga, Chrono Trigger style, cute details, anime, cute fantasy, kawaii, contrasting colors, pretty colors, dramatic lighting. Sometimes people go over the top and kind of repeat themselves, but the point here is that it's not really a description of the exact frog, knight, whatever this is. It doesn't say holding a sword in its hand, standing on stone with a red cape and armor and, green skin and white underbelly and all these different pieces. You can sometimes get away with that, but it often gets tripped up on certain details, and it tends to work better if you give it a bunch of concepts and ideas rather than a paragraph that's true English, with sentence structures. The next rule to keep in mind is that it's always best to put the essentials in your prompt first. So technically, in a prompt, every single word is supposed to have the same amount of weight. They're supposed to mean the same amount to the model. But this is not according to Midjourney, but just according to people's experimentation, including my own. It appears that the earlier words in the prompt have a stronger resulting presence in the images that you get. So if there's something that you really need to have in the image that you can't go without, you should put it early on in the prompt and then add on any other details later. So let me show you an example of that. Here's the little image I used to generate this little robot saying 3, because we're on rule number 3. Take a look at this prompt here. This prompt is rat, woman with pizza, Times Square, sunset, taxis, people, cars, neon signs, billboard. I put the word rat first, and every image has a rat. Rat, 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 rat. That's maybe what I wanted. If that's what I care the most about is the focus on the rat, there's a lot of things that we could do to make it even more specific that we'll learn more about. I could say things like, close-up portrait of rat in Times Square. I'm just listing a bunch of nouns. Rat, woman, Times Square, sunset. But now here's the exact same words in a different order, but rat comes at the very end, and woman with pizza comes first. We don't see rats anywhere, as far as I can tell. Maybe there's a little hidden rat somewhere, but I don't really see rats. Nice images, but no rats, even though rat was in the prompt. So the order can matter. Now, it's really not supposed to. Midjourney doesn't say anything about this on their documentation, but as a rule of thumb, put the important subject of your prompt first or early on in the prompt, especially if you have a bunch of nouns, a bunch of things that go in the prompt. Put the most important ones first. Here's one more example. It's not as prominent. I did rushing river, wildflowers, mountains, sunset, trees, and marmot. Marmot is an animal, a burrowing, rock-dwelling animal. Looks like this. They're all over my yard right now, tearing up my flowers. They're very cute, though, and kind of fat. Now, here's the same prompt, but I put marmot first. And you can see the marmots are definitely more of a focus of each of these images. They're really the focal point. The marmot's still featured here, but, well, this one's actually a grizzly bear. So it's a smaller difference than the rat and the pizza one, but it demonstrates that the order can matter. It doesn't always, and it's not supposed to, but it can. So keep that in mind when you're writing your prompt. Put the important subjects, the things that have to be in your resulting image that you can't live without, put them early on. The next tip that I'll show you is a brand new, very useful command. It's so new that actually Midjourney's own docs don't even cover it at the moment. It's a command called Shorten. And if you search for Shorten on here under the list of commands, it doesn't exist. So what does it do? The Shorten command will analyze a prompt. So we run it by /shorten, and then we provide our prompt. And it won't execute the prompt. It won't make images. It won't run Imagine. But it will analyze the individual pieces, basically the tokens in a prompt, and do two things. Tell us which ones are weighted more importantly than others, which ones can be ignored, and then also it will generate some shortened suggestions. So I'm going to take a very long prompt that someone wrote online that has lots of stuff. Overgrown Magical Forest, Owl, Wolf by James Jean, Yoji Shinkawa, Dan Mumford, Chiara Batista, Emerald Spice Creams, Ornate, Colorful, 8K. It's just a lot of terms. I'm going to pass this into /shorten, and this will bold the important tokens. So pie, overgrown, forest, owl, wolf, this artist name, these other artist names, emerald, creams, black, orange, blue, and then it crosses out certain terms that it's basically telling us are not important. And then it will show us 5 shortened examples ranging from slightly shorter to significantly shorter. But the most important part, in my opinion, is the Show Details button right here. If you click this, this shows us the individual weightings relative to one another of the different pieces, the individual tokens in our prompt. So we can see owl is weighted very heavily. Dan Mumford is. Things like wolf, forest, pie, they're not as significant in this prompt. So I like to do this and take a look, it's new, to understand basically a little insight into the world of the Midjourney model. And if we're getting results that are too owl heavy, well, this shows us owl is the most important token in the entire prompt. So if I run this, we will likely get something very owl-like. Also of note is that the prompts are all significantly shorter than the original, and we see quite a few things that have a weight of basically 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, which is Midjourney's way of telling us those are basically going to be ignored and you don't need them. So let's try running this one here, the shorten prompt. It's still long, but significantly shorter than the original. I'll click submit. I can tweak it if I want to, but I'll click submit. And by the way, these are not going to look anything like the original image. This was done on a different version of Midjourney, but even if it was the same version, right, we probably could try generating variations for centuries and never get this exact result. But as you can see here, the owl portion is pretty present in most of these. We've got owl here for sure, some owl ears, I would say. This definitely has an owl beak. And then Dan Mumford is playing a very important role. So I don't know Dan Mumford's art style, but if we rerun that same prompt without Dan Mumford, we've realized it has way too much of an influence on the end result, even though I don't know Dan Mumford's work at all. We'll wait for this to finish. For some reason, this one is just getting stuck. I'm going to exit out, cancel it. We talked about that in the first section, and then run this shortened version. And we should still see that owl and Dan Mumford and all those other tokens from this chart are still present in this shortened version. Okay, so now here's the one where we removed Dan Mumford. And again, I'm not familiar with his work, so it's hard to say exactly what the difference is. But if we compare to this version here that had Dan Mumford, certainly a bigger range of colors, I would say. And then we can also try shorten on this new prompt that does not include Dan Mumford. Go to show details. And now we have a different breakdown. Owl is still the most important, but then face, then orange. So orange is far more elevated. And that holds true. If we look at these images, they have a lot more orange. Whereas up here, orange was not that, I mean, it still was an important token, but Dan Mumford was way more important. And then orange is all the way down here in the 5th position. So that makes a big difference. And then this is the shortened version where we would click that button to run the shortened version. And you can see that we're still getting very similar results. We're getting, I would say, more consistent results as well, but it doesn't look drastically different from what we were getting here with a much longer prompt. So it doesn't mean that you should always use shorten just to completely shorten all of your prompts, because a lot of those tokens that we have removed will still make a difference. And this is also done, with a single grid compared to another single grid. It's a very poor scientific trial. But what is most useful in my experience in this brand new feature, so I've only played with it for a few days, is the show details button, where you can actually see a breakdown of what the model is paying attention to and what doesn't matter as much. Our next prompting guideline is one we've actually learned a little bit about already, which is to say what you want in the prompt, not what you don't want. It's like what my dad used to always tell me. Tell me what you want, don't tell me what you don't want. If you write a prompt that uses English, like with no cats or without cats or don't include cats, do not make me an image with cats, your image is likely going to include cats because you're putting the word cats in the prompt. Midjourney, as we've already discussed, is not great at understanding the relationship between words. So instead, use the no parameter that we've already learned. Use it to create a negative prompt, right? So pet shop -- no cats will generate an image usually that will have fewer cats and hopefully no cats than pet shop with no cats. There's another strategy for negative prompting, which is to use weights. We haven't learned about weights yet, but you can assign a negative weight, and that's something we'll cover as well in the next section. So here's a quick example of that. I asked for a nighttime view of a tent in Yosemite Valley, and it gave me some nice images, but then I decided I don't want any stars in my nighttime view. So one option is to just say no stars, which is what I wrote here. Nighttime view of tent in Yosemite Valley, no stars, but I'm still getting stars here and here and here and here. All 4 images have stars. So instead, we do nighttime view of tent in Yosemite Valley, dash dash, no stars. Again, it's not a guarantee, and it can be quite frustrating when you can't get rid of something that's in an image that you want to get rid of. But you can see at least 2 of them have 0 stars. And then these top 2 have far fewer stars than what we had here with, the whole Milky Way. So it does make a difference, but it is not perfect. It is not a cure-all. Another option for removing things from a prompt we'll learn later when we cover weighted prompting. So in general, it's just better to specify what you want. Don't try and say, don't include this, no this, without X. Instead, use the dash dash no parameter. This next rule here, this next guideline, is to use collective nouns or specific numbers. And this is straight from the documentation. It's like one of the 2 or 3 things that they recommend on the docs. They tell you to avoid non-specific phrases like multiple people or many sheep. Instead, use specific numbers like 3 people or collective nouns, which is the word for things like flock or herd or a murder of crows, murder of ravens, whatever. There's a name for a group of usually animals, although it doesn't have to be animals. But that's the recommendation here, and let me show you the difference that it makes. So let's do imagine. You can see I just generated this little guy here. Let's do an imagine a 90s Polaroid. Is that how you spell Polaroid? Photo of people at a pool party. Okay. And then let's do one that's more specific. Let's say many people or a group of people. Let's say many people. And then one more finally where we say 4 people. This seems so silly, but again, it's straight from the documentation, and it can make a big difference when you're trying to achieve a specific result. Knowing how many people or how many animals. Oh, it doesn't like that prompt, really. Okay, we'll try that again with something slightly different then. Many people was not allowed, but people at a pool party was allowed. That is interesting. Well, let's see if it allows this one down here. Okay, so this one's running now. 90s Polaroid photo of 4 people at a pool party, which, as you can tell, it's not exactly sticking to. We have a couple of images that do have 4 people. The other 2 have 3 people. But they all have a similar composition where it's a Polaroid photo of a small group of people compared to when I just said people. At a pool party, we've got a group of, 5, a group of 50, a group of 3, and a group of 2. So this all kind of goes back to the initial video about being detailed and specific. And you can't always rely on the model to get everything that you say. I mean, clearly I wrote 4 people and it gave me fewer than 4 people. But these are pretty good Polaroid looking. I mean, these really look like photos, don't they? It's quite convincing. Let's try. I ran it one more time. Same deal. I'm getting 4 people, 3, and 3. But it's still closer, presumably, to the end result that I'm looking for than this here where I'm non-specific. I'm including this because it's specifically called out on the documentation. Use collective nouns, use numbers. But I think it really boils down more to just being specific. And one way of being specific is specifying how many of a certain thing. But there's many other ways to be specific, as we'll see throughout the rest of this section. All right, so next we're going to talk about some of the specific details you may want to include in your prompts. Some of them are pretty obvious, including subject. That's probably the one thing everyone usually includes in their prompt. So I'm not going to designate a specific video to talking about the subject, but I think it goes without saying that you want to have a subject generally in your prompt, even if it's just person, cat, car, or, a 1975 Oldsmobile. I'm not a car guy, but I think there was a 1975 Oldsmobile. Who knows? Not a car person. A fairy slipper orchid, whatever the subject is or subjects, you want to put those in the prompt. And generally, you want to put those earlier in the prompt just so that they get the most attention. Even though everything's supposed to be weighted the same, as we saw earlier, it's not always the case. So put the subject early on. Some of these other things, though, like the environment, the mood, the composition, the lighting, these are things you might not think about day to day. But if you were an artist or a photographer, they're really important parts of just the general craft of being an artist or taking photos. And the same is true of writing Midjourney prompts. So in this video, we're going to talk about the mediums that you can use when writing prompts. So you can do basic things like watercolor, pixel art, lino cut, sketch, photograph, needlepoint, graffiti, oil painting, and they all make a massive difference. And everything I show you on this list can make a massive difference. But medium is one of those, certainly, that you may not even consider all the time, but there's a lot of styles out there beyond just the handful I listed here. And I'll show you some reference guides that illustrate different terms for mediums you may not be familiar with. For example, if you don't know what a lino cut is. So let's try some basic examples. I'm going to use the same prompt and just vary the medium. So I just found a lovely bat in my house. I just moved into a house. It's a northern long-eared bat. Thankfully, there's no rabies where I live. I don't know how long it was in this house and how many nights I slept with it, but I've been bit by a bat in the past, had to get rabies shots. It was horrible. Anyway, it's a northern long-eared bat, and we'll start with just the basic drawing, which is really not very specific as a medium. There's a lot of types of drawing. Let's try, watercolor, and one more. Let's do something entirely different. How about a lino cut? Now, while that's going, let me show you one of the references. There's many references out there, lots of people trying to make useful tools and guides for Midjourney. This is one I'll include a link to, where we get a whole list of different mediums, art mediums. So different types of illustrations. Let's look at pencil and graphite. There's charcoal art, there's colored pencil, there's grease pencil, and there's an example of each type. And then just within the world of ink, we have calligraphy versus ballpoint pen art versus ink, fountain pen art, iron, I don't even know what some of this is, India ink, marker art, whiteboard art. If we look at different types of printed materials, different ways of making prints, you can ask for a 3D print, a laser print, a print. You can do things like ask for a monotype or risograph. So if that's one of those where you may not know what a risograph is, but you kind of recognize this type of art when you see it, and now you have a specific term for it. So sometimes it's just about finding the term that corresponds to the style that you like. Let's look at a few others. You can do things like ask it to make origami or pottery. Just lots of different visual mediums. Okay, so we've got the basic drawing prompt. Those are not bad. We have our lino cut of my long-eared bat. So lino cut is where I think it's linoleum that you cut and sort of create a reverse image on. Then you put ink on it and you print off of that carving. And then here's our watercolor bats. Very simple prompt, right? No other detail, just an animal and then a medium. But it makes a very big difference. Let's just try a few more. Let's do a risograph. Let's try tie-dye. And let's try oil painting. Okay, so two of those finished up. Here's the risograph. Those are pretty neat. And where's the other one? Here we are. This is our tie-dye bat. Kind of neat, although if I really wanted it to be tie-dye, I could get more specific and say I want a bat, long-eared bat design tie-dye shirt, if that's what I really wanted. Let's try a few more. There's some really fun ones on here. You'll see a lot of people use movie poster a lot. I don't know why, but people like making movie posters. So we could try a bat movie poster, IKEA guide, pop-up book. I really like the mosaics. So there's a bunch of different types of mosaics. I like this micro mosaic where it's really small pieces put together. So let's try that. Let's try micro mosaic. Why don't we try stained glass while we're here? And then let's try one media that I've never heard of. Interesting. What is this? Pietra dura. Let's try that. I don't even know what that actually is. is that Italian? And I'll be back when these finish. All right, so here's our micro mosaic built up of all these little tiny fragments of stone and shells and rocks. Pretty neat. Here's stained glass. Nice. And we're still waiting on pietra dura, which it probably means hard rock or hard stone or something. I don't even know if that's Italian, but I think that means stone and that means hard. It's probably a carving. Let's fire off just a handful more. Let's do origami. And then I guess we'll do movie poster because that seems to be a very trendy one. And then let's try something that's not at all a physical art form. Everything we've seen so far is like handcrafted. Let's try, how about just vector art? So something you would draw maybe in Adobe Illustrator, for example. So still, I guess, a medium, but not a physical art medium. It's a digital one. And I end up using some of these keywords a lot. If you look at some of the slides I've made in the past, like this is from Midjourney as vector art. This was 3D model, was the name or the medium that I used. So it's not always about painting or drawing or sculpting or origami. Here is our oil painting finally. Looks good to me. It's got that nice sort of soft light that a lot of oil paintings have. We can get way more specific, right? You can say heavy brush strokes or thick paint or whatever you want. Here's our movie poster. Oh, look at that one. It's like a little Furby. Cute. And we're getting vector art slowly and waiting for origami. Okay, origami finished up. Some of these are pretty neat. Now these are quite complex origami examples. I used to be really into origami, probably not that surprising. There's a guy named Robert Lang who makes origami that looks like this. Really complex stuff. I bought his book and made like one thing and it took me weeks, hundreds and hundreds of folds. Anyway, we could probably do simple origami, child's origami, right? There's many ways of changing the result while still keeping origami. Now this is just a quick overview of 20 different mediums that we could use, but there's a lot more in the world of design. We touched a little bit on vector art, but in the next video, I'm going to talk more about design styles specifically. So along with considering the actual potential art medium, like watercolor, lino cut, and so on, you can also think about design styles. So things like minimalist, flat design, expressionist, psychedelic, these can make a massive impact. So I won't spend too long on this, but I'll queue up a few examples and show you the result. So let's do an isotype, which is a part of the challenge is honestly finding the right terms for the style that you like. But let's do something different this time. Instead of a bat, how about a motorcycle? And then we'll just do isotype, just like that. Nothing else. And then let's queue up a few more. Let's do a psychedelic. Boy, did I spell that right? Let's hope. I don't think I did. We'll see if we can figure it out. And then also, let's do one more that's a minimalist. And again, I'm only using one of these terms at a time, but of course you can combine as many as you want. You could have a minimalist psychedelic motorcycle. I don't know what that would look like, but I'll be back when these all finish up. All right, the isotype finished up. I think they're pretty neat. Yep, I really like that. So super useful. I think that specific keyword isotype for my type of, I guess, design style that I like. You can make little logos, make YouTube thumbnails. It just looks clean. We've got our very psychedelic motorcycles, and then we have the minimalist ones, and I also like how that turns out. And again, you can combine all of this, right? I can do minimalist line drawing or something. So let's just queue up a few more: motorcycle, minimalist, and then I'll say line drawing. Let's also try something completely different. Let's do a collage. So that's more of a medium. The lines between these things don't really matter, right? It's just about including them in the prompt. But you can include a design style like on top of that, maximalist or expressionist. Maximalist, collage, motorcycle. And then let's do one more. Let's do a motorcycle. Let's do it as an oil painting, but design style will be surreal. And I'll be back when that's done. Okay, so those finished up. We've got our line drawing that's minimalist of a motorcycle. Looks pretty good. We have our maximalist collage. Those are also pretty neat. And then we have our surreal oil painting, very, I don't know, Dali-esque up here. Very surreal. And then I ran a few more while I was waiting. I found this keyword I'd never heard of, suprematism. I don't know, but it's this like blocky, sort of abstract-esque blocks of color style. And that's the interpretation of a motorcycle through that lens. And then I just tried something completely different, an exploded view of a motorcycle. Also very neat, I think. Not so much this one, but this one is pretty neat, seeing all the parts. So again, lots of different options here. There's no way to encompass every design style in a single video. I just want you to think about that when you're writing your prompt. So is there a particular medium, like painting, watercolor, line drawing, tie-dye, whatever? And then also, is there a design style? Is it psychedelic, maximalist, surreal, expressionist, all the different, abstract? And that kind of ties into the next thing we'll talk about, which is a really common way of prompting Midjourney is to actually start with an artist that you like. So that's coming up. The next thing to keep in mind when writing your prompts is the lighting that you want. So this can make a really huge difference, honestly, not just with photorealistic images, but any sort of image, even just a 3D render. The lighting that you choose can drastically influence the end result. I don't know if you've ever tried taking photos. Well, I assume you've tried taking photos on your phone, but with a fancy camera, the camera can make a lot of difference. But what makes things really look good is when you have good lighting. A camera only goes so far, and the same is true of Midjourney. Now, it will add some nice lighting and make things look good by default, but you can control it. You can do things like, say, soft lighting, neon lighting, spotlight, harsh lighting, golden hour lighting. So golden hour is that nice half an hour or so right before sunset when the sun is still up and everything gets kind of golden. But you can also do directional lighting. You can do colored lighting. So let's take a look at some examples. Why don't we do an imagine here? What should our prompt be? How about alien in armchair? And then let's do soft lighting. And then let's do movie lighting. And then let's do one more example. How about golden hour? And I'll head over to the same guide that I showed you earlier. This GitHub page has a reference for lighting techniques, and it kind of goes overboard. A lot of them are very specific. We have things like backlit, right? That's a very distinct style of lighting. Dim lighting, dim, bright, mood lighting, moody lighting, cinematic lighting, accent lighting. But then if we keep going down, we have high key lighting. So this is generally a high contrast form of lighting where you have really bright whites and dark blacks. What else do we have? Up lighting and down lighting. So where the lights basically are located. Let's keep going down. We've got concert lighting, light pollution, but then specific types of light. So flood lighting versus spot lighting. Keep going down. You can add sun rays, sun flares, lens aberrations. There's a million things that you can do. And like I said, some of this goes over the top. Like, showing you a Coleman lantern. That's not really that's just a subject, I guess. It's not really influencing the lighting of the image all that much compared to saying, that we want UV lighting or infrared or that we want an X-ray. So let's check up. Have these finished yet? Here's the soft lighting one. Okay, pretty soft lighting. Let's look at the golden hour also. Golden hour looks good. Let's run this again with this time. Let's do high key lighting. And then back on this GitHub page, we have things around shadows. If you want shadows, if you want ray trace shadows. These are all just examples too, right? None of this is built into Midjourney. These are just different types of lighting that you can think about. Let's try a more specific example. Let's say lit from top left and see if it can figure that out. And then let's do one more. How about neon lighting? So here's our high key lighting. This is that very high contrast form of lighting where you get the dark darks, the bright whites, and you can see that it's showing up here. And we could also tell it to be black and white, right? That's not really the type of lighting, but that'd be a stylistic choice. You can say black and white, high key. Here's the beautiful neon lighting. Looks pretty neat. And did the movie lighting ever finish? Here's movie lighting, and that does, in fact, look like a movie. You'll also see, though, by putting the word movie in there, it also impacts the alien itself. It's not just the lighting, although this does look very cinematic. The actual alien looks like a movie alien, I guess I would say, compared to some of these earlier examples. It still looks like something from a movie, but it's more stylized here. This looks like something that, is almost more of a horror thing. So just keep that in mind. By putting that word movie in there, we're introducing a lot of other stuff into the world of all the possibilities that Midjourney can pick from. Alien is one thing. Movie plus alien is another thing. It's not necessarily going to pick out movie and alien or movie and lighting and only use movie in that context. It will use all of the words that we put in here. So it might have been better to do studio lighting instead of movie lighting, but we're still getting that example. Okay, so here's lighting from the top left. It's not perfect. I mean, this one is definitely getting lit from the top left. This one is from the top left. This one is lit from the top right. So, you can control some of this, but it's not always perfect, as we already have experienced. And if we go to the community feed, let's just sort by top. I'll zoom in. You'll see that a lot of them incorporate lighting. So, well, not that one. That was a very simple prompt. But this one here, if we look at the prompt, what do we have? Cinematic, soft, studio lighting, backlighting. So just one example. This one I imagine says something about soft or candle lighting or something like that. Let's see. Ethereal candle light. Amazing natural light. And let's see if we can find one more with some lighting. I mean, this one probably will mention something about lighting. Photography lighting. Professional lighting. So a lot of people incorporate lighting into their prompts. Not always necessary. If you're trying to do something like this here, probably don't need to specify the lighting as, cinematic or spotlit or something when it's a more highly stylized or something that's non-photographic. But even something like this, you could specify that, it does specify the lighting actually. This little render of a fuzzy, plump, round, confused yellow parakeet, it says soft lighting, studio portrait lighting, volumetric lighting. And I would guess not all three of those are necessary. There's also dramatic lighting and then cinematic, illuminated face. It's a little bit over the top. And why don't we actually put it to the test? I'm going to copy this prompt, and we're not going to get the same image, of course, right? It's not deterministic. We won't get the exact same image. Not to mention this is possibly done in V4, not 5.2. But if we use the new command shorten, and I tell it, here's the original prompt, I'd like you to tell me how much of this is actually necessary. Here's what it says. The important things are macro, soft, fuzzy, blue background, portrait lighting. So yeah, it's crossing out volumetric lighting. Lighting is already repeated a bunch of times. Illuminated, and then many other words, right? Style, ultra, 8K, cinematic. So it shows that it's still important to include some lighting, like soft lighting here, but not necessarily every single mention of lighting in 4 different variations. So let's see what happens. Let's run the original prompt, and then let's use the shortened prompt. And we're not going to get the same results, but let's just see if the lighting part of things still looks similar. I'll be back when that's done. Okay, so those just about finished up. Yep, they're both done. So this is the original long prompt that mentioned like 4 different types of lighting: portrait lighting, illuminated face, dramatic lighting, soft lighting. And again, we're not trying to recreate the original image. It's just not possible. But let's just take a look at what we get. This is probably closest to that original image if we were trying to do that. And yeah, there's a lot of lighting involved, right? It is soft lighting, it's portrait lighting, it's illuminated faces. But then if we look at what we get here, this is the shortened version. So not this part. I don't know why that one just never ran, but it's this one here, where the only mentions of lighting are soft lighting and portrait lighting. Still makes a big difference. It's definitely soft lighting and portrait lighting, and it looks good, right? They're very similar, I would say. We have 3 that are pretty bird-like, and then one little baby chick that's more cartoony and very cute. Same thing up here. Anyway, like any prompt, you probably want to run it a bunch of times and then find one that you like, but this is more just about showing that lighting is important, and also just another chance to play around with the new command, Shorten, which is fun, just to figure out what the model itself thinks is important and not important about your prompts. One of the coolest and most useful things to do with Midjourney is copy the style of an existing artist. Midjourney was trained on at least 100 million different images. It's unclear exactly how many, but there's at least publicly they've stated over 100 million images. And a lot of those images are from very famous artists, right? That's just what a lot of images are in the world of art. And that ranges from things like, surrealist painters like Dali, Magritte, Picasso, Escher, but also a lot of smaller artists that you may not even know about. But if you find an image that you like, sometimes what you can do is figure out who made it and then use that. So if it's just some person, that is a friend, it's not going to work very well, that you just find some painting they've done that you like. But if you find somebody who's an online artist, even a modern day current artist, assuming they didn't just, start painting yesterday, but there's a chance the model knows about their style. So this can be really useful. Instead of trying to describe exactly what a Picasso painting looks like, it's pretty hard. I mean, I guess you could say cubist and blocky and warped perspectives and whatever, but it's often easier just to use the name of the artist. And the same goes for photographers. So let's try a few examples, and then I'll show you, there's tons of resources to find all sorts of different artists. You don't have to be an art expert. So let's do an imagine here of I like a scarlet. I've been doing too many animals. Let's do something that's not an animal. How about woman playing violin? And then you could just put the word, let's say Pablo Picasso. But what a lot of people do is in the style of Pablo Picasso, in the style of X. And that tends to work very well. So in the style of Pablo Picasso. Let's do a few of these just very recognizable artists. Let's do in the style of, Banksy. And let's also do one with Salvador Dali. I've already done Dali earlier. How about, let's do Magritte. Okay, and while that's going, I've hit my limit of 3 concurrent. Let's go take a look at the same GitHub repo called Midjourney Styles and Keywords Reference. It has a very long list of artists. All sorts of different categories, so realism versus graffiti versus romanticism and Renaissance. Let's take a look maybe at expressionism. So tons of different artists, or post-impressionism, right? Well, just Van Gogh apparently. Abstract art, realist art, tons of different artists, a lot I've never heard of. Surrealism, Dali, Picasso, Magritte, Max Ernst, lots of different examples. And when you think about why this is effective, or can be effective, when you consider what all goes into an artist's paintings, it's tons of different elements, the way they light it, the actual medium that they use, the style choices that they use. There's so much that goes into it, and you can encapsulate that all with the name of the artist. Now, this only really works if there's a particular style you're really after, some inspiration image, but you can also combine artists too. So you could take, if you like the painting style of Grant Wood, who I think he did American Gothic, but you want something that is combined with Alex Gray's psychedelic paintings, you could probably try feeding it in together. And let's just check in on this. Awesome. So here's our Picasso, woman playing violin in the style of Pablo Picasso, looks good. Here's our Banksy, also looks good. And then here's Rene Magritte. So Magritte is the guy who did the, a bunch of paintings. This is not a pipe painting, the apple in front of the guy's head painting. And this kind of captures his composition, where he does a lot of things that are centered in the frame. Although I would still say, if we were really going after it, we would try and get it to be an oil or at least an acrylic painting, some sort of painted medium. This to me looks like a Magritte inspired photo or 3D render. Anyway, let's try a few more. So this works with all sorts of artists. Again, it has to have been trained on the artist's work. One of my favorite photographers is named Gregory Crewdson. He does these really crazy, hopefully there's no nudity, these very crazy cinematic photos that he sets up for days with spotlights and with crazy lighting and very hyper staged sets. So everything that you see in these images has been staged, like it's a scene from a movie. Good documentary on it, by the way. It's really interesting to see how he lights everything. Anyway, I like this style. I don't really know how I would describe it. It's hard. I mean, it's cinematic, but it's also, there's like a sort of mood to all of his works. It's somber or isolating or just moody. If you look at these, right, they're not exactly screaming happy. And it's a kind of similar set type of lighting. It's the very deliberate sets. So what I can do is just use Gregory Crewdson as my as part of my prompt. Imagine, whoops, misspelled it. Woman playing violin in the style of Gregory Crewdson. Now, I would probably have more details there. But let's just see what if this is all I give it. Let's see what happens. But often you'll have, very specific things you want. She's going to be on the left side of the image, and there's going to be a spotlight. There's a fireplace in the background, whatever. So while that's going, let's take a look at a few other artists and just queue up some more. So I do like Alex Gray's very deliberate, distinctive style. How about some graffiti artists or even Instagram artists? So again, these are like not, artists necessarily in museums. Maybe they are. I apologize if they are. But we may be able to try some of these. Like, this is a pretty distinctive style of digital art. Let's try taking this person, Peter Moorbacher, and let's do the same thing. Imagine woman playing violin. Geez, cannot type. In the style of Peter Moorbacher. And let's try one more, maybe a manga artist. Ooh, I like that. Let's try that as our style. So in the style of Junji Ito. I don't know why this Gregory Crewdson one is not going yet. There's an error. Looks like Midjourney's being a little buggy. So while those are going, I'll just return back to the community feed, and you'll see that a lot of these, maybe not all of them, but a lot of them will mention specific artists. Like this one here, art by Brian Kessinger, J. Scott Campbell. I don't know these artists, but I assume those are artist names. Here's another example of these. It's jellyfish, coral reef, I'm not sure what it is, but by Aaron Hansen and Donato Giancola and Roger Dean. So again, I assume those are famous, maybe watercolor painters. The point is that a lot of people take advantage of this, of providing specific artist names. Same thing here. Rachel Rushk, Jan Dahim. I'm sorry for butchering the names, but this is a very common tactic when you're trying to achieve a specific result. It is hard to describe an artist's style, but it's very easy to describe their name. Okay, I mean, take a look. This is the Gregory Crewdson example. It's still a little bit too 3D rendery. There's more things we could do to steer it in the more photographic direction. But look at the lighting, the composition, the moodiness of the scenes. So I showed you his original images a moment ago. Hopefully you remember. They're very moody, soft lighting, a lot of sort of smoke effects and fog in the air, overcast nighttime, gray skies, very staged sets, moss and greenery, and just overall a somber sort of desolate mood. And that's what we see here. And all that I said was a woman playing violin in the style of Gregory Crewdson. Now, there's a lot of potential issues where people are unhappy about using Midjourney to copy artist styles. That's a whole other can of worms I'm not going to open up, but I think it's really fun to play around with. And this would just be my first iteration. Oh, it wasn't even done yet. Wow. So here is the in the style of that anime artist, what is it, Junji Ito? It looks very similar to those images that I showed you. Spirally, dense backgrounds. And then this is the digital artist that we found, sort of ethereal. I don't know how to describe it. It's hard, but it looks very similar to that man's work. So very cool stuff and a really useful technique. Now let's end with a few more examples. It looks like this one ran twice. And some of these are certainly more photography, and they all just scream of this artist. I can tell you just because I'm familiar with his work, it's pretty accurate. Now let's try a few more maybe hybrid examples. So instead of copying one artist's style, let's try doing a combination. So one of my favorite artists is Albert Bierstadt. Never said his name out loud actually, but he does these American West paintings that are just completely unrealistic, but very beautiful, crazy lighting, stormy lakes, mountains, wildlife, and they're sort of fantastical. Let's combine his work with maybe, let's do something obvious like Picasso. Let's just see what happens. So let's do imagine, and then I'll say landscape. Is there a particular landscape? I don't know, Rocky Mountain landscape. Lake. Let's put a moose in there. And then I'll say in the style of Bierstadt and Pablo Picasso. And this will be a very weird hybrid, but I picked Picasso because it's just going to be very obvious, right? We all know what Picasso's work looks like. And then Bierstadt does these, did I already go past it? Yeah, these very oil painty, beautiful, soft lit fantasy landscapes. Let's try one more while that's going. So the artist Kehinde Wiley does a very distinctive style. He painted the, I don't know if it's the national, what you call it, the White House portrait, or if it's in the National Portrait Gallery, but he did the portrait of Obama that was quite famous with the floral background elements. That's a trend, paisley and florals in his photos. Let's try doing a portrait of a dog or a cat in the style of Kehinde Wiley. Okay, so I ran dog with bow tie in the style of Kehinde Wiley. And I think that's enough examples, but just for fun, let's do one by Alex Gray. Very distinctive psychedelic lines, sort of fractally. I don't even know how to describe his paintings. And by the way, in the style of Bierstadt, in the style of Picasso, it finished. I'm not terribly enthused. Here's one that was just in the style of Bierstadt. It is more smooth, I guess, and more oil painty, less blocky. Here's the one that I also added in the style of Pablo Picasso. It's a little bit more blocky. We're not getting any cubist elements really, but I guess you could say there's some Picasso in there, although I'm not super enthused with how that turned out. Now, these definitely look like Kehinde Wiley paintings, although they're a little photographic, so of course we could then try running that again. Just one more example. Whoops. Imagine. And I'll say dog with bow tie, maybe oil painting. So add the medium in there. And let's go back to Alex Gray. And what would be a fun one to paint or to imagine here? How about just a parrot flying? And I'm going to say in the style of Alex Gray. I'll be back when these finish up. Okay, here we go. This is the second time that I ran the dog with bow tie in the style of Kehinde Wiley, but I put oil painting as the medium. This was the first time. It looks painting-ish-esque, but still very, very realistic for a painting. And then if we look at these examples, this is much closer to the style of Kehinde Wiley, where he's not going for hyperrealism anyway, or photorealism. He does a lot of, line work there, where the shadows and lighting is kind of exaggerated and almost looks like a lino cut or something, where there's a harsh contrast. I'm not an art critic in any way, but this looks just like his work, and the backgrounds are all spot on. Just by adding that oil painting keyword in there, it really helped us. Finally, here's our Alex Gray parrots, and they look pretty close, to the style of Alex Gray. Probably more colors than he actually uses. If we go back to these references, yeah, there's more that we could do to try and guide it in that direction. We could add psychedelic, we could add a color palette, lighting, a specific medium, but I think that's enough for this video. Fun stuff, very fun, and a really useful technique is to say in the style of X artist. The next tip here is probably also pretty obvious, but it bears at least a short video dedicated to it, which is using color. Color keywords can make a huge difference. And there's a lot of ways to use color in your prompt. You can create a tinted photograph, or you can just ask for a pink cat, or you can ask for blue and orange lighting. So you can use it to influence the actual type and the color of the lighting. So you can do the global illumination, make something pink, the whole photo or the whole piece of art, or you can call out a detail like a pink cat. So to save time, I've pre-run some of these. Here's a simple example to start. In this example, I asked it to give me a man splashing paint, and then I just said 3 colors. And I didn't even specify which 3, it just picked 3. So we have yellow, yellow, orange, and blue here, sort of a red, yellow, and blue there. You can see it's 3 colors. This one's orange, blue, and yellow, I think. But then I could get way more specific or treat it completely differently. Here I said portrait of male lion in the style of Eduardo Cobra, which is Cobra. He's a graffiti artist. And in this case, I just added the keyword pink at the end. So I didn't say only use pink, but it's predominantly pink, right? That's like the main color takeaway from these images. Here's a completely different example. Man sitting on park bench, and then I said orange and blue lighting. So I'm controlling the lighting, the color of the lighting. We get an orange and blue moody scene. Here's another. Same prompt, portrait of male lion in the style of Eduardo Cobra, green. So I didn't say it's a green lion, I just said green. And that does enough to sort of tilt the image to the side of green. Now here I'm using it to specifically say I want an orange colored chameleon. I don't want the whole image to be orange. Here's a blue colored chameleon. The whole image is not blue either. I could say blue tinted image, or something like down here, teal tinted photograph of man holding umbrella for cat. And the whole image is not teal, but it has a teal tint. So using color in combination with the word tint or in combination with lighting can make a big difference if you're doing photographic stuff or really anything. But also here's an example where I gave specific colors of paint. Man splashing blue, pink, and purple paint. Here we are, blue, pink, and purple paint. So it's pretty good at picking up on colors and understanding the difference between saying a global color like a pink image or pink tinted lighting versus calling out the paint as pink, or the chameleon as blue, or the chameleon as orange. And I lied, I'll do one more example because I didn't show black and white in sepia. So let's do man sitting on park bench in the rain. I'll also add some just moody as a keyword. And then I can say black and white, photograph in this case. And then I'll also do sepia photograph. And you can use those terms without the word photograph, but in this case, I want a photograph as my example. But you could do a sepia watercolor. So these color keywords, yeah, probably pretty self-explanatory. I mean, there's other things, neon, pastel, beiges, subdued. There's many different things you could go with, high contrast colors. But including color can make a big difference, and the model is pretty good at picking out what you mean. So here's the black and white photograph. Definitely black and white and looks like a photograph. And here's the sepia version of the same prompt. Looks like a sepia photograph. So it really influences the end result. I think it goes without saying, you can use color in a lot of ways. Another factor to keep in mind when writing prompts, kind of simple, maybe obvious one as well, is the emotion or mood of both the characters or subjects in the actual image, but also of the overall image itself. Using a word like peaceful to describe, a lake with a cabin is very different than using the word moody or unhappy or grumpy. But then, of course, you can also say you want a happy cat, a grumpy cat, a moody cat. Pretty self-explanatory and simple, but I'll show some quick illustrations of the impact it can have. Okay, so let's work with a subject to start. We've done a lot of animals. How about we try using a flower? So let's go with a orange flower, and I'll just do a regular orange flower. I'm not going to describe anything else about it. And then, of course, I can do happy orange flower and grumpy orange flower. I'll be back when those finish. If we look at the community feed, you'll see words like happy all over the place. Here we have confrontational. Okay, pretty significant difference. Here's just a regular orange flower. I think this is a dahlia. I love dahlias. Then we have our happy orange flower. We have our grumpy orange flower. I like that one quite a bit. And of course, we're relying heavily on the default or built-in styles because I'm not really giving it any description. If it's a cartoon, if it's a 3D render, if it's a drawing, if it's hyper-realistic, I'm simply saying grumpy orange flower. Now let's do something completely different. Instead of the actual subject, let's do something like man in kayak on mountain lake. And then I'll say moody. And then I'll do serene. And what's one more sort of global adjective for the mood? How about angry, which is maybe a little different than moody. So here's our serene lake. Here is the moody scene. Of course, it really changes things quite a bit. That single word, I didn't have to say, overcast, low clouds, harsh light, that sort of thing. Grays, and all the stuff that goes along with moody. So, it's pretty self-explanatory, but this is something that a lot of different guides and tutorials, not to mention the Midjourney docs, specifically call out as having a big impact. Using mood descriptors. Happy, sad, moody, serene, peaceful, all those sort of words can make a big difference both on the individual subjects and on the overall image, the whole composition. Another thing to keep in mind when writing your prompts is the time that the images are set, when things happened in the image. One way of thinking about this is eras, using decades, for example, the 1920s, 1980s, the 2010s, the 2000s, that sort of thing. But also using the roaring 20s, I guess that's another decade, but maybe Industrial Revolution or, Paleolithic times or whatever you want, some setting as far as time goes. And they could even be time of day, 6 p.m. light or kids going to school in the morning. Just consider time itself. And also this slide is really terrible looking. I struggled a lot to try and lay it out. But let's take a look at some examples of that. So let's play with decades to start. Let's do group of children walking to school. And I'll have this be in a photograph style. We'll have a separate video talking about creating photographs or things that look like photographs at least. So group of children walking to school photograph. And then I'm going to start with the decade up top. So I'll say 1940s group of children walking to school. And then let's simply vary the decade to 1980s. And then finally, let's do 2010s. Whoops. Okay, I'll be back when these finish up. Okay, so this is starting to finish up. Here's our 1940s kids walking to school. Again, I didn't specify if it should be color, black and white, sepia. All that I said is 1940s. But one of the reasons that it can be useful to use time and eras or decades as a descriptor here is that it also encapsulates a ton of information. In the same way that an artist, saying in the style of, Grant Wood, describes a lot about the medium, the color choice, the lighting, the decade. There's a bunch of stuff that goes into a single artist that we can encapsulate with a single word or a couple of words. The same is true for periods of time, where it would be harder to describe this without using the actual time in 1940s, describing the outfits, the streets, the way, the quality of the photograph, the graininess, the colors. You could do it, but using the decade helps a lot, or even a specific year. So here's our 80s. That looks like 1980s kids walking to school. And then here's our 2010s, which this one looks good to me. Yeah, I guess these are all, I'm not a fan of the black and white ones. I might try rerunning this one again and just saying, color photograph. I'll try it again with a specific year because 2010s maybe is a little confusing. We don't use that as often as things like 1980s and 1940s. Let's just go with 2015. Group of children walking to school, and I'll say color photograph this time. Now, what I'll also do is do a couple examples where instead of using a decade, it will still describe time, but using just a specific time of the day, which also makes a very big difference. Let's do a scene, beach, bonfire, illustration, and then let's go with, let's do one that's in the middle of the day or maybe the morning. So I'll say 6 a.m., beach bonfire illustration. And then let's try another one that's at midnight. And we should get a pretty big distinction here just because we're telling it the exact time of day. So decades, eras, any sort of big periods of time. It doesn't have to be a decade. It could be a single year, or it could be a whole century. You could just say Renaissance. You could do any sort of movement in time, but it can make a pretty big difference. Same thing with specifying a particular time of day. So our 6 a.m. one, hopefully we'll get some sunrise. And then our midnight one should be pretty much at night, like pitch black. So here's our 2015s, group of kids walking to school. I'm not thrilled with the composition, that they're all walking away from the camera. So, that's something we'll explore next is composition and perspectives. But it does look like a group of kids walking to school in the 2015s. Although it's a very specific, it kind of looks like a colder climate perhaps, or somewhere like in the northeast of the US. So again, we could specify the setting, which is yet another thing we have yet to talk about, backgrounds and settings and locations. Okay, so here's my illustrations. This looks good. Here's our 6 a.m. bonfire. Man, that would be nice with the sun coming up. And then here's our midnight bonfire with the moon in the sky. Looks good to me. So very drastic difference. I think it's all pretty self-explanatory. A lot of this section is just like, here's one after another thing to keep in mind. You don't always have to use them, but these are also just tips a lot of the documentation for Midjourney specifically calls out. So it's worth at least considering for the 2 or 3 minutes of this video. Next up, a really important thing to keep in mind with any image you make is the setting, the background, or the atmosphere. Now, this is a pretty broad category. Setting is a very broad word that can mean a lot of things, but think of where your compositions are actually existing in space. Is it at the beach? Is it indoors? Is it in a studio setting? Or is it something completely different, like a solid white background or a blurred background? So these 4 images I generated separately using a prompt that just said tiger head illustration, comma, and then 4 different backgrounds. So this one was tiger head illustration, cityscape background, tiger head illustration, jungle background, tiger head illustration, purple paisley background. I really like that one. And then tiger head illustration, solid yellow background. So these are very different, of course, right? It adds a lot of flavor to the images, but it also can be very useful, I'll show in the next video, to use the keywords white background or black background, where you can then use Photoshop to isolate the subject of your image. If you want something like this right here, Midjourney can't generate an image that has transparent background currently, and it can't match this color very easily. So what I did is I just told it to generate a white background for this image, and then I deleted the background using Photoshop or Canva or many tools that are out there that will help you do it, even if you have no idea how to use Photoshop. Anyway, we'll come back to that. So let's play around with some of this stuff. Again, pretty self-explanatory. What I will say is when you start introducing colors, like we've already seen before, we had a whole lecture on colors, you have to be careful to try and get, if you only want a yellow background, for example, this tiger, the whole tiger is kind of yellow. So you may need to play around with your colors and say, orange tiger, yellow background. If you just put the word yellow in there, you may end up with a yellow tiger. It's not amazing at understanding the relationship between color and subjects unless you explicitly put those words next to each other. So we've been doing a lot of animals, flowers. What else exists in this world? How about an inanimate object? How about a mug? Sure, I'm looking at my coffee mug right now. So let's do imagine. Coffee mug. Let's call it a cute coffee mug. Go away. And that's all that I'll say. Maybe an illustration. And then I'll say solid white background. Next up, let's do a blurred background and just see where how about cafe background? And then finally, let's do cute coffee mug illustration. Let's do autumn leaves background. And let's see how this goes. I'll be back when this finishes. Okay, so the first one finished up. Coffee mug illustration, solid white background. There we are, although this one's not exactly solid white. But this is the sort of thing that's very easy to change in Photoshop. We can isolate the actual subject and then change the background color as we please. That's generally easier to do than trying to tell Midjourney that you want the exact shade of purple that your company uses as the background. Then we have our cute coffee mug illustration, blurred cafe background. And this is, again, one of those things where it worked. We got the blurred background of a cafe. However, it also influenced the mug itself. And this is kind of what I was alluding to when I said it doesn't always understand the difference. It doesn't understand English very well. And the difference between saying you want a cafe background versus just including the word cafe and it sees the word mug, and now it's made us a mug with a cafe illustration on it. So we need to go back if we want a white mug and try being more specific. But it did give us the background. But this is sort of the game you play where we want a cute white, maybe solid white coffee mug, blurred cafe background. Okay, so that one finished up, and this is a lot closer to what I had in mind, where it's a cute solid white coffee mug illustration, but it's in front of a blurred cafe background, you can see this one still has a cafe on it, but these two are close. And this one's also a cute, I said cute mug, which maybe I didn't need to say, compared to here where this one's actually pretty good. That's a cute mug too. But 3 of the 4 images it created have a cafe on the mug itself. So you just need to play around with things. And then, of course, you could pick one of these and then create variations and continue until you're happy with the end result. Another thing is it's on a table, and I could probably totally change this up. This kind of ties into our next video on composition, but I could say something like floating in the air, or, centered floating, something like that. So if I don't want it to be on a surface. Additionally, my background of autumn leaves one, the first attempt only went okay. As you can see here, this one is a cute mug illustration with autumn leaves in the background, but these have, at least this one and this one, 1 and 4, have leaves on the cup. It's the same problem. So I reran it as solid white coffee mug on background of autumn leaves, and this is much closer. I also got rid of illustration, which I didn't actually mean to do, but that's why the style is completely different, right? These are all illustrations. This is more of a product photo looking thing. It's quite a bland mug, but it does work, right? And it's on a background of autumn leaves. Okay, let's do one more. I'll just use the floating keyword. Well, it's not a keyword, but I'll use floating. So cute. Let's just do solid white mug. I'll get rid of illustration too. Floating on blurred cafe background. And we'll see how that affects the end result. Maybe I don't want it on a surface. I just want it hovering in midair. Okay, so the floating example finished. It didn't exactly work the way I wanted it to, right? It's still on a surface. So I reran it again, this time trying floating in air, and that kind of worked on this one. It is in the air, but what I really don't want is the table in there. So I used a final prompt with the no parameter, -- no table, surface, or counter. And this is getting me closer to what I want. It's not quite done yet, but this one, and this one are just floating in midair. Although I've now introduced balloons, so maybe I need to add -- no balloons. It's always a constant battle. Well, I shouldn't say battle. It's a constant iterative process of writing prompts. Next, we'll talk about perspective and composition. So these are some of the most important things to consider when you're writing a prompt. Unless you want to be completely surprised by what the model comes up with, it really helps if you have an image in mind you're trying to recreate or have the model get close to. Think about what the image actually looks like in terms of the composition. If you were a camera, and you don't have to know much about working with cameras, but it helps to understand the difference between, a telephoto zoom lens versus a very wide angle versus a fisheye lens versus a bird's eye view, a high angle, low angle, close up, all these different options. It helps to understand what those look like and then include those in your prompts. You can end up with radically different results of the same subjects, the same colors, the same moods, all the other words the same, but you can change the composition drastically. These are kind of separate concepts too. Perspective versus composition could be a broader topic that refers to, where are things in the actual image? Is it in the top left corner? Is there a person, looking to the left and another person looking to the right? Those would all be part of the composition. But what I'm referring to here is more about the invisible camera that's capturing our image. Even if it's an illustration, is it a wide angle drawing? Is it a bird's eye view drawing? Is it a first person perspective in an aircraft? There's a million things that we can try. So let's start with what should we do? Let's do a child walking through Kyoto, and let's do nighttime, or maybe nighttime is fine. And then I'll just go with a couple of different possibilities here. Let's do a wide angle. And then let's do telephoto or close-up. And let's also do an ultra wide. Okay, while that's going, let's go back to this reference that I've shown a couple of times. There's a page on this Midjourney styles and keywords reference called perspective. And this shows a bunch of different examples. Again, it kind of is overkill or super specific sometimes, but we have things like a top view, a side view, a satellite view, close-up view, extreme close-up. I assume macro is somewhere in here, maybe. Wide shot, epic wide shots, selfies, centered shots, first-person view, third person, low angle, high angle. Let's see how this is going. So here's our wide angle. That looks good to me. These are cool images of a kid walking through Kyoto at night. So wide angle lenses, are going to show you a lot more of the world captured in frame. They can distort things. They can make people look smaller. They can make things in the distance look much smaller. So here's our close-up. And this is definitely tighter if you compare the two. Right? So this is much wider, although it's still not that close up. If we really wanted it to be of the boy, we would say something like portrait of child walking through Kyoto, centered on face or something like that. Now, let's try a few more examples. Let's do the same thing. So child walking through Kyoto, but this time I'll say high angle. And then after that, I'll do a low angle. So this is where the camera is positioned. If it's low on the ground looking up, if it's high above looking down, and then let's also do a bird's eye view. So very different, basically top down. Returning to this reference, there's a whole section on perspectives. One that is kind of trendy and you'll see a lot is using isometric. So I believe isometric refers to, I think it's a 45-degree angle. I'm not exactly sure, but it's a set angle that a composition is, or a camera sort of looking down on something from. And it's used a lot in video games and in sort of trendy design language for websites. So you can use the isometric keyword, and you'll end up with something like this, or like this here. I used isometric to make this. And then again, there's a lot of very specific things in here. If we keep going down where we have, 2-point perspective, 3-point perspective, linear or curvilinear perspectives, and then things like cross-section, exploded view, cutaway view. I really like doing these. These are fun. You can generate some really cool images. I don't know if I would call that a perspective. It's more of just a composition or even a style, but I'm grouping it all together. Here's our low angle where the camera is close to the ground. You can see, like, especially this one here or this one here, the camera is low, and that's low angle. Here's high angle where the camera is up higher, looking down, although it's not quite as extreme as a bird's eye view like we have here, which just generally is going to be higher up. And then we will eventually have our top-down view, which should be a more extreme view looking down. And let's play around with a few more. Let's do, instead of a child walking through Kyoto, let's do a piece of pizza. Sure. Let's do slice of pizza, and let's do a macro photo. So a macro lens allows you to get really close to your subject, and way closer than you can normally get, and still focus on the image. So we're doing a macro image of a slice of pizza. We'll do a separate video on product photography and different ideas and things you can do to try and get better product photos, not of your products, but just sort of placeholder things that you can use all over the place in marketing and on your own website and just at sort of e-commerce world. So here's our top-down view. So more extreme. It's still not exactly, straight 90 degrees down, but it is a top-down view. And while the pizza one is going, let's finish up with one more example. Now, let's just play around with first person and third person. So here's the macro pizza, by the way, a close shot of a piece of pizza. But you can even do, a macro photo of a bug or something that's really small that you normally wouldn't be able to capture very well with a typical camera lens. So maybe a bee on flower macro photo. Okay, so we'll end with a few examples of first person and third person. Let's do first person view out submarine coral reef. And then we also have keywords like centered, right? You could use that if you want to get something centered in an image. So here's our first person view coming into reality here, where we've got the perspective from somebody looking out a submarine towards a coral reef. Here's our macro photography of a bee on a flower, right, pollinating it. So this is a typical macro look where you get extreme blurred in the background because of the focal length, and I don't really know a whole lot about it, but you get extreme blurred and then really high clarity on tiny little details. Finally, here's an example of trying to get something centered in the image. So Midjourney often will center things by default. It tends to heavily favor centered compositions, but if it's not centering something and you want it definitely to be centered, you can use the centered keyword, right? Center, centered, that sort of thing, portrait centered, and it can make a big impact. Now in the next video, I'll talk a bit about the challenges involved in moving things around. It is very difficult to describe having a composition where you want something on the left or on the right or on the top because of its tendency to center things. And that's what we'll learn about next. Okay, in this video, I want to talk about changing compositions and trying to move things around, which is not easy to do in Midjourney. So my goal here, I want to have a bee. I want it on the left side of the image and then blue sky on the right side. So of course, saying bee flying centered is not going to help me. But if I try things like bee flying on the left, blue sky background, it doesn't really help. It looks like it's maybe controlling the fact that it's flying from the left, it's looking to the right, maybe, because 3 of these images are facing to the right. You could try bee flying left side of image. Nope, didn't work. Here's another one. Left side composition. This did some weird stuff. I got a whole bunch of little split view images. A bee flying from the left side with lots of negative space on the right side. No, didn't really work either. Bee flies alone isolated on the left side of the image. Blue sky background. Also doesn't work. There's countless Reddit threads, people asking about, I have a character I've generated, anime, it's a lot of anime, a lot of anime characters. I've generated one and it keeps being centered. How do I move it to the left or to the right? It's just not easy to do. However, the best strategy to do these days with Midjourney 5.2 and later is to find an image that you like. Let's say that I like this one here. I think I like that one. Yeah, let's go with that one. Actually, you know what? I kind of like this one too. Maybe this one. I want it flying from the left to the right. So I'm going to upscale this one. So this is 1, 2, 3. And once it upscales, I'll use the zoom features that we learned about a little while ago. And I'll zoom out. Let's do a 2 times zoom out. And we hope that it doesn't introduce a whole bunch of different elements into the composition because the prompt is very specific. Blue sky background, negative space. So let's hope that it gives us just more blue. And then what I can do is crop the image after the fact. So I won't do that using Midjourney. It involves, a tiny bit of photo editing, but this is the best strategy to try and move something around, at least with the way Midjourney currently works. It is not good at understanding specifics of a composition, but we can guide it. We can find an image, we can zoom out, and then we can crop, and we can become the composer of the image using zoom. And so this is going to work great. I mean, of course, we'll lose quality by cropping, and that's always a problem here. But this is currently the best approach to this problem. So when this finishes, if I'm happy with it, you can see, of course, it still keeps everything centered. Okay, so these all will work. Let's pick one of them. I don't know. Maybe this one here. So I'll upscale 2. I'll download it. Okay, so I've uploaded my image to Canva. And you can use anything, right? You can do this in Photoshop, Preview, really any application. And then I'll just crop it to the composition that I like. So if I want to keep it, well, I'm not keeping it a square, but here we are. I've got my B on the left side, and then I've got a lot of negative space on the right. And if I knew I wanted this aspect ratio, I could also have used the -AR aspect ratio parameter, although it still will often keep things centered no matter what the aspect ratio is. So there we go. That's just one example of how you can use this approach. Zoom out from a composition you like and then recrop, and you can try and move things around that way. But it is one of the hardest things to do in Midjourney, along with text, which is a whole separate topic that we'll cover shortly. Another strategy that's really useful that I've already mentioned at least once has to do with setting a solid background color so that we can isolate using Photoshop or Canva or any photo editing tool. We can isolate the subject and remove the background. So it's basically a way of not having a background, but we start by telling Midjourney that we want it to create a solid white or solid black or solid something background. We want a color that contrasts with our subject. So a lot of photo editing tools could easily remove this B, if that's what I was trying to do, from the background and separate it out. But it often is easier to do a solid color. So let's try an example. Let's do let's do something kind of fantastical, a cyberpunk orchid. Okay, so while that's going, we can clearly see the background has all sorts of stuff going on. And if I want to just isolate this orchid somehow, the easiest option is to rerun this prompt and pick a color that contrasts with the subject. So, don't pick a pink background, but in this case, I would probably go with just a black or white background. So imagine, if I can spell it, solid white background. I like to put the solid keyword in there so it doesn't try and do like a gradient or some blurred white photographic background. Although most of the time, a lot of photo editing tools are really smart today, especially now that a lot of them have access to some very fancy AI models where they can easily find edges and identify subjects. I'll let this go and be back when it finishes. Okay, so that finished. Let's pick one that we like. I like this. I think I like this one the best. So I'm going to upscale that one. That's 3. And I don't really care to make variations. Let's say I'm happy with that. So then I will go to the web, save the image. I wish there was a save button right here. instead of having to go to web first. Okay, so I download that. Now I'll go back to Canva, and I'm going to use Canva just because it's free. Everyone has access to it, and you don't have to know how to use Photoshop. Photoshop is definitely better if you have some complex things you need to separate from a background, but I'm going to upload my image. I'll just make a new slide that I can work against. I'll add in this image. Okay, let's make it a bit larger. Whoops, not like that. And then if I go to edit photo, I can click on BG remover. It's just a single click, and it tends to do pretty well. I mean, take a look. I've already isolated this. That was it. Now you can go back in and edit specific parts using the background remover, where I can restore some stuff. I can custom, what do I call this? I can erase things. I'm not going to do that though. Oh no, it doesn't let me undo. So I guess I'll have to paint that back in. And that just makes it super easy to isolate an asset. And then I could use this. I think it would look better on, a different background color. Yeah, maybe something like that. I'd probably get rid of this little bit down there. But this is the best strategy if you're trying to isolate an asset. And it also tends to work better with more illustrative assets rather than this sort of photographic looking thing, because we get these harsh edges and the lighting. It doesn't quite look realistic. Still looks fine. But if you look at some of the other things that I've done this with, here's this isometric bookshop, this moody sculpture, this time machine, this collection of colors, this cartoon of Salvador Dali, this vector drawing of a cat in a spotlight. This is called a knolling. We'll talk about that as a fun little, just a cool type of composition that most people don't know even has a name, but it's called a knolling. It's a collection of elements sort of spread across a surface. Anyway, all of these had a white background or a solid color background that I then removed using Canva. Okay. Next, I'd like to talk about some tips and ideas to generate photorealistic images. This is not an example of something I would call photorealistic. This is a little cartoony, sort of over the top, too beautiful maybe. The lighting feels artificial, and this is a result of some of just the default styles that we get from Midjourney. Now, it's still a nice image. It's a portrait photo of a woman knitting on the subway. That's the prompt that I gave it. Here's the same prompt. Another kind of similar image where it's super beautiful, lovely lighting, but it's almost like glowing, and it feels just like too polished and like a 3D render, I would say. And finally, one more example of the same thing. This one's not as extreme, but if you look at her face, it doesn't quite look like, it's pretty photographic, but it doesn't exactly look real. So this happens a lot. This is a simple prompt. It just says portrait photo. But there are some specific things that we can do to try and steer the model in the direction that we want. And one of those really common strategies to make something photorealistic is to include keywords like large format or medium format photo, or even specific camera names. So take a look at the difference here. Same prompt, portrait photo of a woman knitting on the subway. But then I add on shot on medium format, and then a couple of very fancy cameras. Phase 1 IQ 180, very fancy. I think it's actually a large format camera, but a very fancy camera. And then Hasselblad, also fancy, expensive camera. It's unclear if it makes a huge difference which camera you pick. Other people will say like Canon 5D or Fuji GFX. There's a million cameras out there, and it will make a difference absolutely if you pick an old school camera and you put a type of film in there, for example, Portra or something. That will make a difference. But with these modern cameras, it's not super clear if it makes a big difference which one you pick. But compare no camera. Right, we didn't say medium format or large format. We didn't say Hasselblad. It looks like something from, I don't know, like video game art maybe. Beautiful, but over the top. And then we get something way more realistic when we say medium format or shot on medium format, phase 1. Here's another example from the same grid. This looks way more like a photo in my opinion. Same as this one here. We've got the harsher, more realistic lighting from a subway. It just feels more like a photo is what I would say. It's not perfect, but you could then work with one of these, upscale it, generate variations. If you're going for a very photographic look, it's my experience that it makes a pretty significant difference if you at least mention 1 or 2 cameras in there. Now, this is also something that I've added on here where I did style raw. And this can be useful to get a more photographic look. We talked about this when we covered the -- style parameter. It strips away some of Midjourney's built-in styles, and it's useful specifically when you're trying to get a more photographic look. Same thing here. So this is an example, same prompt, portrait photo of woman knitting on the subway. I still have the camera stuff in there, and then also style raw. I couldn't tell a massive difference between leaving style raw off with still including the camera data, or the camera part of the prompt, versus the camera plus style raw. But generally, if you are going for a photographic look, it's useful to remove those default styles. So let's try this ourselves. Let's come up with a photo that we want. Okay, so let's try creating some of these images ourselves. Let's go for a very photorealistic, let's go with a photo of red-haired boy looking out window at night. And yeah, I think that should be good. Let's just start without any of our sort of photo keywords. Large format, Hasselblad, won't even describe the lighting or the angle, and we'll just go with the default regular Midjourney model styles, so not style raw. And maybe just for a better comparison, I'll run this twice. I'll be back when that finishes. Okay, so those finished up. I went ahead and upscaled a couple of them just to show, the non-photo realistic portions. I like the composition, reflection's good, I like the lighting, but again, this looks slightly fake, slightly over the top, and not quite realistic. Same thing with this one. It's very nice, but it kind of, also this reflection looks, maybe I'm wrong, it looks like a different person. But it also is just video game-esque. It's very good, but still not quite photorealistic. So let's try running the same prompt. Well, not the same prompt. Let's try running the prompt and tweaking it slightly to be a photo of red-haired boy looking out window at night, shot on large format Hasselblad. And we can put another couple cameras in here like Canon and Nikon. It's unclear if listing more of them makes much of a difference though. And then I'll also say wide angle lens. Let's try that. And I'll run that twice. And you know what? I'll also run one with style raw. And I'll be back when those finish up. All right, so most of those have finished up, and there's quite a difference, especially when I've run it a couple of times. So I actually, while I had paused the recording, I reran each prompt 2 or 3 times, just so we had a bigger sample size. And this is our first version, our first grid that includes the photography language, large format, Hasselblad, Nikon, Canon, wide angle lens. Some of them still look like this. They look a little rendery, but like this one right here, which I blew up or I upscaled. Where are you? This one, it's not perfect, but if you look at the lighting here, it's a lot more realistic where we have some shadows, some actual even blown out portions compared to what we were getting here when we didn't use the photography language. It just feels fake. Again, I can't really put my finger on why. It's just over the top, overcooked. Here's another example. This grid here, we've got the lighting here looks far more realistic to me. Now this one, maybe those are a bit more stylized too, but I blew this one up and this looks pretty good. I don't know if I would say for sure that it's a photograph, but it looks pretty good. Then it gets even better when we add in style raw. So here is the first grid of style raw. The lighting's just much more natural. I blew this one up here. This one's pretty good in my opinion. It looks pretty realistic. The lighting looks good. It's everything's not so like hyper smoothed out. Here's another grid that I did with the same photography keywords plus style raw to strip away those Midjourney styles, and these all look pretty good to me. I mean, this one here, that one almost looks like a photograph. looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do is throw these together on a slide so we can see them side by side. I'll be right back. Okay, so this comparison shows some of the differences. And again, this is from running each prompt like 3 times. So I'm sure we could get some pretty bad results using style raw and camera language and probably get some good results without any of those add-ons. But here is my original prompt, which was red-haired boy, photo of red-haired boy looking out the window, something like that. And without any of the camera language, without style raw, it definitely looks fake. This is with the camera language, so shot on Hasselblad large format, Nikon Canon wide angle lens, and it certainly looks more like a photograph. The lighting is the biggest difference as we progress from left to right. And then I added style raw with the exact same camera language and the same original prompt, but -- style raw to remove some of the Midjourney styles. And this looks the most like a photograph in my opinion. It's not the most beautiful image here. I mean, I really like this one actually. It's just a cool looking image, but it still looks slightly unrealistic. This one to me is pretty hard to tell that it was made by Midjourney. Maybe I've been staring at these for too long though, so you tell me. But I think there's a clear progression here, certainly between this one and this one. Big difference. Speaking of creating photographic images using Midjourney, another tip that can help a lot is to use the name of a specific type of film. And this is one of those things like using an artist's name, like in the style of, X, Annie Leibovitz or something, where there's a lot of stuff encompassed in a single word or phrase. In the case of a film, there's a lot that goes into the look of a film, the graininess, the color range, the dynamic range, a lot of things that are kind of intangible. And if you're not a photographer, I'm certainly not, things that are hard to describe with words. But if you know the look that you like of a specific film, it can really make a pretty serious impact. So I'm going to start with a basic prompt, a street style photograph of a man with a scarf. And you know what? I might rerun this with style raw. While that's going, we'll take a look at the first draft that we get back. So it looks pretty good. Street style photograph of a man in a scarf. Of course, for some reason, they all have sort of longish hair blowing in the wind. Looks good. Now let's try it again, but this time we'll specify a specific type of film. And the first film that I've chosen is Fujifilm Superia 400. So here's some image examples of that. And this Wikipedia page that I was on earlier has tons and tons of different films. I tried to find like a nice reference page that showed examples of what films looked like. I couldn't really find one, unfortunately. But there are some pretty famous ones that I'll just briefly touch on. So I'm going to modify my prompt, run the same thing, but say a street style photograph of a man with a scarf, shot on, and then Fujifilm Superia 400 style raw. And then let's pick another film. One that I have open here is Lomography Color Negative 800. So we'll just swap out the name of the film. And then let's do one more. Pretty famous one is Velvia 50. So we'll do that. Shot on Fujichrome Velvia 50. And if any of these finished, well, here's our style raw. Again, no film has been specified. It's just sort of a modern DSLR looking shot. There's no filmic quality to it, no graininess that I can see. It's a pretty standard looking modern street photo. But if we look at what we're starting to get back here, you can see that there's a bit of a different color range or white balance going on here. So did this one finish up? Yeah. So this one was our Lomography Color Negative 800. And maybe I'll upscale this one. We'll probably be able to see a pretty significant difference in comparing them. This one is Fujifilm Superia 400. Let's pick, kind of like the top right. So that's 2. And there's definitely a filmic quality to these, where we're getting some of those colors that are natural to this specific film. We're getting some of the graininess, and it definitely looks like a photo. Now, you may not prefer this look compared to one of the, I guess you would say, cleaner, more modern images. Let's just pick the second one also. but these are looking pretty photographic. And I've found that by using a specific film name, and this is not something that I came up with, just to be clear. There's lots of people on Twitter and Reddit talking about this. But by using these film names, you can get a much more photographic look. So let's compare that to the one without a film name. It's not bad, right? It still looks photographic, I'd say. Maybe his face is a little bit too rendery. Doesn't quite look like a photograph. But it's also sharper, higher quality, right? More color range, I would say, compared to what we see from this example, which is Superia 400. This example, color negative 800. And for some reason, Velvia has not started yet. Now let's try a black and white one, because I found that these also work really well. If we take one like XP2 400, we'll rerun the same prompt again, swap this out. And then also, another famous one is definitely Portra, Kodak Portra 400. I'm not a film camera person, but that's like one of the 3 films I've heard of. And then let's go back to this Wikipedia page. Let's pick a black and white one. Oh, actually, I already have one open here. It was, the CMS 202 Pro. And I really like the look of these, really dramatic. It looks like, almost Ansel Adams-esque photography. Very contrasty, dark darks. Again, I fail to describe this sort of stuff. It's hard to try and, you can create a black and white image, but there's so many different flavors of black and white. So if this is the flavor that I want, it's much easier to use the name of the film. So we'll wrap up with that. Let's do one more here. Shot on CMS 20 Pro? 22 Pro. And here's our Portra. And I think these all look pretty good. I mean, let's pick, I don't know, which one should we take? Maybe the 4th one, the 2nd one. So just keep this comparison in mind. This is our original benchmark that had no film. And then here's one that has some film. Here's another that has some film. And yet another. So it pretty drastically changes the look of the photograph. It's still photographic looking, but it's a very different quality to it. And it's kind of hard to put that into words, especially if you're a photography noob like me. Using film is an easy way. You don't have to worry about white balance and dynamic range and understanding, contrast levels and graininess and all that stuff. Now let's take a look at, this was Velvia 50. I mean, these are all pretty good, I think. They definitely look like street photos shot on a film camera. What is unclear, I should say now, is how much the specific film name actually correlates to the resulting images. Because as you'll see here, this is the CMS 22 Pro, which maybe is not a very popular film. I just randomly picked it from Wikipedia. The images shot on it look like this. What we got here does not quite look like that at all. So there's a high chance that just including any film name will make something look more filmic, but it doesn't appear that you'll be getting the exact look from every specific film. I imagine it's just the more popular ones like Velvia and Portra. Again, if I've heard of those, those are like the 2 or 3 that I actually know, and some of these other ones are quite niche. But let's try finding another black and white, maybe more popular film. Okay, to put my theory to the test, I found 2 of the more popular black and white films just with a Google search. What are the best black and white films? And again, I'm a noob with this stuff, but it looked like Fujifilm Neopan Acros 102 film. It's very popular, and it did, in fact, at the very least, make the image black and white without me ever saying black and white. Right, so there's some connection there. Whether it actually looks like this exact film is unclear, but the fact that it's black and white, and I never use the words black and white, gives me some hope there. And then here's another example. This one gave 2 images that have a bit of a sepia tone and a little bit of color, but this one here is the Ilford Delta 100 film, and also it's supposed to be black and white, so it got sort of in the right direction without me ever having to use the word black and white. Now, if I really wanted it to be black and white, of course, I would say black and white. Or if I was really going for an Ansel Adams look in a landscape photography, or in a landscape photograph, I would probably say, alpine, landscape, in the style of Ansel Adams. Very famous landscape photographer, shot black and white, did a lot of California landscapes, Yosemite, High Sierra, that sort of thing. And if you have a specific artist you're trying to capture, or that style that you're trying to capture, calling back to that lecture we had a couple videos ago, using the name of the artist makes a pretty significant difference. And here's what I ended up with. 4 black and white images, alpine landscape, right? It was very broad, the actual prompt, but it does look like an Ansel Adams image. And that's it for this video. So if you're going for a very specific photographic look, using the name of a film can make a big difference. And it appears that really the more popular films have a bigger impact, or a more correct impact. If there's a bunch of images that have been shot on Velvia and Portra on the internet, it's more likely that the model will understand Velvia and Portra. This will be a super quick one. I want to talk about creating corporate-y looking illustrations, like some of the stuff that you see here, maybe not this one, or what you see here, or further down, something like this. The kind of in the 2020s, maybe late 2010s, very popular flat design style. I think some people call it corporate Memphis design. So there's certain words you can try to use to achieve this style. In this example, I did corporate tech, generic illustration, 2 women dancing, flat design, 2D, bright colors, corporate Memphis in the style of Behance, which is a famous or a popular website for sharing illustrations and design assets that designers have created. So this is one just simple example. We could try one more. Let's say that I am creating a blog post on coding. Nah, that's too basic. Job interview. Sure. Let's do corporate tech, generic illustration of a job interview. And then I'll put maybe a computer in there, flat design, 2D. What else should we do? We'll add corporate Memphis if we're going for that look. We could also do an isometric one. That's also very common. Isometric we've already looked at, but basically it's a perspective that you can use, and it's pretty popular in a lot of blog posts, illustrations, and logos and things. Anyway, corporate tech, generic illustration, job interview, computer, flat design, corporate Memphis in the style of Behance. I've also seen people try and do Slack and Dropbox, the 2 companies that famously worked with this sort of flat design style early on. I'll be back when this finishes. All right, it's coming along, and you can see we're getting a very generic tech illustration. I have been guilty of using a lot of this sort of stuff in some of my course images in the years past, and it looks right on brand. And there we go. Of course, you could pick one, generate variations. Nothing revolutionary, but just some of the keywords that can help you get this style. Things like flat design, 2D, corporate Memphis, in the style of Behance, different tech companies, that can all make a difference. And just as a quick comparison, this is what it looks like if I just say corporate tech, generic illustration of a job interview with a computer. If I don't include flat design, 2D, corporate Memphis, in the style of Behance, Slack, all that stuff, we get an illustration, but it's not at all that same style. Now, a lot of people will probably prefer this style, but this doesn't work well for, a slide or a thumbnail on something or a blog post header. We want that simpler look that we got up here. And this is more of a, traditional illustration that takes a lot more work to make than what you see here, at least in my experience. This is easier to create. So just a quick comparison. That's how you can create some of those, I don't even know if they're trendy anymore, but those very popular tech illustrations. One of the biggest limitations of Midjourney, probably the biggest issue it has, is that it's just terrible at generating any sort of text. And it's not really surprising, and it's kind of always been that way, although earlier versions were surprisingly a little bit better at working with text than more recent versions. But still, if you're trying to get a specific word to show up, the name of your company in a logo, it's really, really hard. You might need to re-roll and create variations thousands of times. It is not really a feasible thing to do. So what's generally a better approach is to ask the model to not include any text specifically, and then add your text in afterwards with some post-production using, Photoshop or even Canva or whatever tool you want to use. So that's my advice. That's pretty much the standard advice. There are people who will claim they can generate text with Midjourney, and people have done it, but it requires lots of effort and time and also expense, right? Because you're paying for, unless you pay for unlimited slow generations, or relaxed generations, you'll run out of credits if you try and do, thousands of images over and over and over. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. Bookshop logo, 2D, bright colors. I mean, maybe this one works if our bookshop starts with the letter B, but here we've got Boschost, and then here we have Brobipitch, something like that. Neither of those are what I want, but maybe I like one of these. It won't really work to get the exact same image back, but maybe I'm happy with the direction it's going in, but I don't want text. So I can say -- no, text, words. Let's just go with that. Now, this is still not foolproof. We will likely still end up with some that have some text in them and some words. And I think it has to do with anytime you use the word logo, most logos have words. And so we're introducing the concept of words in the prompt. Even though I'm trying to tell it no text and words, it's just not going to always outweigh the fact that the word logo is in there. And that kind of intrinsically means include text. All right, so I ran this a bunch of times with some different variations. I tried no text, comma words, so -- no text words, and every single example has words in it. Or I don't know if I would call that words. It has text in it. I tried again, no text, no words. 3 of the 4 have text and words. I tried no text. All 4 have words. So it's not working great. What I did find to work a little bit better, surprisingly, is to do -- no letters. And letters maybe is more specific. 3 of the 4 in this panel or in this grid do not have text. Then I've got this one. Same thing. I use the same prompt, -- no letters. 3 of the 4 have no letters. So I ran this like 5 or 6 times, and it seemed like using no letters tended to work better. Certainly better than using no words or no text, where I was getting words and text in almost every example. And again, I think this has a lot to do with me introducing the word logo, which has a lot of text-heavy meaning already encoded in that word. So if you're trying to make a logo, and we'll have a separate video on this, it's often helpful to actually not use the word logo, but instead describe what the logo looks like, but not say that it's a logo, because you'll probably end up with text. So now, I could take one of these, generate variations, and add text on top of it, although these aren't really great logos in my opinion. I guess they technically are fine, but I would keep generating and get variations until I'm happy with something.